Welcome to our show, Immigration Briefing. Today, we dive into the controversial actions of the Trump administration, which recently deported hundreds of immigrants to El Salvador, even after a federal judge issued a temporary halt to these removals. Critics are raising alarms about the legal implications and the treatment of those deported, especially as they are sent to notorious prisons. The situation is unfolding rapidly, with further hearings scheduled to examine the legality of these actions. In other news, Secretary of State Marco Rubio is doubling down on the administration's tough stance regarding visa cancellations, particularly targeting students who protest against U.S. foreign policy. This has ignited a firestorm of criticism from civil rights advocates who argue that such actions threaten free speech rights for visa holders. The implications of this policy are significant, as it raises questions about the balance between national security and individual rights. Finally, we look at a growing trend of Chinese families migrating to Japan for educational opportunities. As more parents seek to enroll their children in prestigious schools, the demand for educational migration is on the rise, leading to a notable increase in the number of Chinese residents in Japan. This trend highlights the changing dynamics of education and migration, as families prioritize better prospects for their children's futures. Please stay tuned for more detailed coverage. Nikkei Asia reports that the Trump administration has controversially deported hundreds of immigrants to El Salvador, even as a federal judge issued a temporary block on such deportations due to a wartime declaration targeting Venezuelan gang members. U.S. District Judge James E. Boasberg's order came after two planes were already in the air with immigrants on board, prompting a verbal directive to turn them around. However, this directive was not included in the written order, leading to a chaotic situation where deportations proceeded despite the ruling. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt defended the administration's actions, claiming the court order lacked lawful basis, while Salvadoran President Nayib Bukele celebrated the deportations, highlighting the complexities and legal ramifications of invoking an 18th-century law under modern circumstances. The Independent highlights Secretary of State Marco Rubio's defense of the Trump administration's decision to cancel the visas of students participating in protests against Israel. This includes the case of Mahmoud Khalil, a legal permanent resident arrested and targeted for deportation after leading protests at Columbia University. Rubio argued that visa holders do not have the same free speech rights as citizens, framing their actions as contrary to U.S. foreign policy interests. The situation has sparked outrage among civil rights advocates, especially as Khalil has not been charged with any crime. The incident underscores the tension between national security, immigration policy, and the rights of individuals on visas in the U.S. The Sydney Morning Herald details the drastic measures taken by the Trump administration, including invoking the Alien Enemies Act to deport alleged members of the Tren de Aragua gang to El Salvador's notorious Secot megaprison. This act, last used during World War II, allows for the immediate deportation of individuals deemed alien enemies, without the protections typically afforded under immigration laws. Despite a federal judge's ruling blocking these deportations, the administration proceeded with flights already in motion. Critics, including civil rights groups, have condemned this use of wartime authority for immigration enforcement, calling it unprecedented and potentially illegal. The Venezuelan government has also denounced the move, framing it as a violation of human rights, which adds to the international implications of the Trump administration's immigration policies. Australian Broadcasting Corporation, Sonia, a transgender woman from the Philippines, faced a harrowing experience upon arriving in Sydney, where she was profiled and detained by the Australian Border Force, ABF. Initially expecting a pleasant holiday, she was subjected to invasive searches, harassment, and forced to sign a visa cancellation document after officers discovered an old email related to her past as a sex worker. Instead of being taken to a hotel as promised, she was sent to the Villawood Immigration Detention Center, where she endured a terrifying 3-day ordeal in a male compound. The conditions were distressing, with incidents of violence and sexual harassment from both inmates and staff. Sonia's story reflects a broader issue faced by many trans individuals and migrant sex workers, as advocacy groups highlight the systemic discrimination and profiling that occurs at the borders. The Toronto Star, amidst a controversial backdrop, the Trump administration continued to deport hundreds of immigrants to El Salvador, defying a federal judge's order that temporarily halted such actions. The judge had issued a restraining order to protect migrants from being removed under an outdated wartime declaration, yet flights were already in the air when the ruling was made. Salvadoran President Nayib Bukele, in a social media post, downplayed the situation, while U.S. officials celebrated the deportation of alleged gang members without providing evidence of their criminality. The ACLU has raised alarms over the legality of these removals, warning that the administration's actions could lead to unjust deportations based on mere accusations of gang affiliation, stripping individuals of their rights and due process. Associated Press: the situation surrounding the Trump administration's deportations escalated as the government proceeded to transfer migrants to El Salvador, even as legal challenges mounted. The use of the Alien Enemies Act of 1798, which grants extraordinary powers during wartime, has drawn criticism for its potential misuse against Venezuelan migrants. The ACLU's legal actions aim to protect these individuals from being wrongfully labeled as gang members and deported without the opportunity to defend themselves. As videos emerged showing the harsh treatment of deportees upon arrival in El Salvador, concerns about human rights violations intensified. The federal judge emphasized the need for judicial oversight to ensure that constitutional rights are upheld, highlighting the precarious position of vulnerable migrants caught in the crossfire of political maneuvering. Associated Press: in New Jersey, the race for governor has turned into a battleground over immigration policy, with Newark Mayor Ras Baraka emerging as a vocal opponent of the Trump administration's plans to build a new immigration detention center. Baraka and other Democrats are grappling with how to address immigration in a state where public sentiment is divided. While some candidates are leaning towards a tougher stance, Baraka advocates for a more compassionate approach, arguing that most voters do not support the mass detention of immigrants seeking a better life. His bold stance could set the tone for Democrats nationwide as they navigate the complexities of immigration in an increasingly polarized political landscape. Nikkei Asia: a rising trend among Chinese families is migrating to Japan for educational opportunities, particularly in Tokyo's Bunkyo ward, known for its prestigious elementary schools. Social media platforms like RedNote are fueling this migration, with parents eager to secure a quality education for their children. The number of foreign students in Bunkyo has surged, particularly among Chinese nationals, as families relocate to enroll their children in the sought-after 3S+1K schools. Despite the challenges posed by language barriers, schools are adapting to accommodate these new students, reflecting a broader shift in educational migration patterns that show no signs of slowing down. New York Times: the landscape of migration at the U.S.-Mexico border has undergone a dramatic transformation, with illegal crossings dropping to unprecedented lows under President Biden's administration. The once chaotic border has quieted significantly as Biden's policies, influenced by rising public concern over immigration, have led to stricter measures. Meanwhile, former President Trump has intensified his hardline tactics, including halting asylum processes and pressuring Latin American governments to curb migration. Critics argue that these approaches fail to address the root causes of migration, creating a climate of fear among families and reshaping the entire migration paradigm in the process. Nikkei Asia reports on the increasing trend of Uzbek migrants moving to South Korea, despite the latter's recent economic challenges. Muzaffar, a father from Samarkand, represents many who seek better educational opportunities for their children, as he prepares his son for kindergarten. After years of hard work in South Korea, Muzaffar has improved his family's living conditions back home, earning significantly more than he would have in Russia. The remittances from South Korea to Uzbekistan have surged, highlighting the economic ties between the two nations. However, the future of this migration is uncertain as South Korea has cut its unskilled migrant quota and warned of stricter visa regulations, raising concerns for those who rely on these opportunities. The Independent shares the harrowing story of Ma Yang, a Hmong American mother of 5 who was recently deported to Laos, a country she has never known. After serving time for marijuana-related charges, Yang's legal residency was revoked due to poor legal counsel. Now in Laos, she is isolated, without documents, and struggling with health issues, including diabetes and high blood pressure. Yang's plight underscores the complexities of the U.S. immigration system and the devastating impact of deportation on families, as she feels abandoned by the country she once called home. Australian Broadcasting Corporation highlights a federal judge's swift response to President Trump's invocation of the Alien Enemies Act of 1798, aimed at expediting deportations of Venezuelan nationals. The act, historically used during times of war, faced immediate legal challenges from civil rights groups, leading to a temporary injunction against deportations. Justice Boasberg expressed urgency in halting these actions to protect vulnerable individuals facing removal. The debate centers on the legality of using such an archaic law against criminal gangs rather than recognized states, raising questions about executive power and immigration policy in the current political climate. The Toronto Star reports on the emotional return of Jasmine Mooney, a Canadian woman who was detained for nearly 2 weeks by U.S. immigration officials. After being denied entry into California from Mexico due to visa issues, Mooney found herself in the harsh conditions of a detention center in Arizona. Her mother, Alexis Eagles, expressed her relief and concern over her daughter's treatment, highlighting the inhumane conditions in which Mooney was held. The case has sparked anxiety among Canadians regarding the current state of U.S.-Canada relations, with British Columbia Premier David Eby urging the Canadian government to take diplomatic action to ensure the safe return of individuals like Mooney. The Associated Press delves into President Donald Trump's recent invocation of the Alien Enemies Act, a law dating back to 1798, which allows for the deportation of non-citizens without court hearings during wartime. This unprecedented action was taken against members of the Venezuelan gang Tren de Aragua, identified as a significant threat to U.S. security. However, a federal judge swiftly intervened, halting deportations under this order, highlighting the legal and ethical implications of using such a centuries-old law in peacetime. Critics argue that Trump's approach is a dangerous abuse of power, as it targets non-state actors rather than foreign governments, raising concerns about due process and civil liberties. The New York Times provides insight into Tren de Aragua, a notorious transnational gang originating from a Venezuelan prison, which has expanded its criminal activities across Latin America. With a reputation for extreme violence, including murder and human trafficking, the gang has become a focal point for U.S. law enforcement. The Biden administration had already classified Tren de Aragua as a transnational criminal organization, and Trump's recent actions aim to curb their influence in the U.S. However, the gang's complex origins and operations raise questions about the effectiveness of such measures and the broader implications for immigration policy and international relations. Thank you for tuning in. The content above showcases the latest briefing reports and analytical synopses, thoughtfully curated by the 6Do team. These insights stem from a wide array of reputable media outlets, think tanks, government sources, and specialized experts worldwide. We encourage you to explore these sources for a comprehensive perspective. Keep in mind that while the content may not always align with the official standpoint of 6Do Brief, it's not meant to be taken as absolute directives for decision-making. Comprising seasoned media professionals, learned scholars, and accomplished scientists, the 6Do team embodies a trailblazing, fully independent media entity. To customize 6Do Brief to meet your professional needs, you have the option to subscribe to a diverse array of briefings on our website, 6dobrief.com. Regardless of your location, you can conveniently receive 6Do Brief via email.
News breaks, buzz the ground, stories spit, walls come down. Voices merge in the sound, faces mix in the crowd. Broadcasters paint the scene, world events on our screen. Every link a different theme, words collide in the stream. 6 degrees connect the dots, background stories moving nuts. Hear the voices rise aloft, truth unveils in every spot. Cultures clash across the globe, spin the threads in a stroke. Every story wears a robe, truth and lies in their code. Journalistic beauty, secrets that they don't see. Every angle they repeat, in the news we take a lead. New perspectives day by day, hidden truths come to play. In the background shades of gray, every story finds its way. Perspectives day by day, hidden truths come to play. In the background shades of gray, every story finds its way. Cultures, I go, what really or do not.
Hot enough to be you, everything and ever. Hot enough and after, hot enough and after, hot enough and after, enough 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 enough